We're looking at the land and we say, what basic ingredients are we gonna look in order to build a story? And we decided to go with really the materials that built this land. With the stones, the sand, the glass, the iron, and the ores. We thought that this would be a beautiful focal point for a collection of art. If you look at the collection in the Katara Towers project, there are thousands of works. And they tell many stories, and they're all linked in many different ways, so that when you walk in the project, there are many ways by which you can walk the culture. The focal point is Qatar, or the Qatari culture, as a trader of other cultures. We looked at artists that would give us a wonderful interpretation of that narrative that we wanted to create in the space.
Quando scolpisco è come ho detto, è un incontro tra me e una pietra. Io vedo delle qualità e del potenziale nella pietra, ma lo vedo a mio modo. E quindi in qualche modo quello che emerge nella scultura un po' sono io e un po' è il potenziale della pietra.
If you take the rooms in Fairmont, each room has a work that if you walk into the room and look at it, it may be enigmatic. You know, what is this and why is it here?
But when this project came about, I think they were looking specifically for work that resonated with the theme of dunes and wind and the humming dunes of Qatar.
To see the whole work, you need all the people in all the rooms looking at the art, and then communally, of course, completely virtual and conceptual, the dune comes to life. If you go to the Cloud Lounge, there's this beautiful round ceramic work that looks like what desert sand that contains gypsum may look like after the rain dries.
Alors, la pièce que je fais pour Qatar, c'est une grande mosaïque qui représente à la fois l'eau et à la fois la terre desséchée.
Remember how I said that you stand in the room and you see only a sliver of a dune and only all the people together in all the room looking at the work see a dune? Here, it's the opposite. You, the little one, stand in front of that very large work and you see the dune, and then you can walk around and the dune changes for you.
We have a strong concept which revolves around the medium of materials and light and the relationship between the two. And then we apply that kind of thinking to projects of all sorts of different scales.
We took the idea of trading cultures and created this library that contains over 7,000 books of the world's classics. The objects that are spread here between the books are objects that are inspired by the stories in the books. The chefs have worked on the inspiration of some of the books. The mixologist developed cocktails that are also based on the stories in the books. Here, the stories are alive even when the books are still on the shelves. You know, Provoke was actually built on two concepts, fire and ice. And those two allegedly extreme elements that fuse together to make a food experience in that case.
So I have created two mirrored installations, but using color to really define those two spaces. So look, the forms that I'm using and that I'm working with are very much sort of referenced and connected to Qatar's architecture. It's contemporary architecture, it's modern buildings and it's modern skylines, and also some of its historical forms and its historical architecture.
My work is inspired by Islamic geometry. So I'm very inspired by how this kind of geometry makes you feel very grounded. And I really wanted to capture that feeling and bring it into people's homes, into public spaces in a more contemporary way.
Let's talk about colors. Look at the environment where we are. You look at a dune in the morning, it's a completely different dune than the one you look at dusk. All those had to find their way to the collection.
So I'm creating 50 original pieces, very long linear pieces, very inspired by seascapes, but in an abstract way, but also some of the other pieces with the gold leaf and different reflective surfaces that we're using. They're all on canvas, but it's almost like this, you know, percussion of movement.
You walk in and there's this beautiful work of many little squares done in clay, in porcelain, with 23-karat gold accents on them.
So each of my tiles for the project is marked with a test number. And that is the part that's referencing a process of making in ceramics. But I also thought that it's really nice that each of us are individual and we have our own code, our own DNA, which these numbers remind me of, so that this is really telling a story about humanity through a making process in ceramics.
When we looked at the local artists, what we were looking for, again, were artists that were along that line of speaking on behalf of their culture, but also reflecting or interacting or interpreting other cultures and then absorbing them into their own culture.
So the inspiration comes from the desert, the environment actually, the local environment and the markings in the desert. I try to always use natural rocks from the desert to preserve maybe more of our culture roots and tradition.
We wanted to get that warm cultural essence of a ceremonial gathering of people for drinking tea. And for that, in the tea lounge, there's an amazing display of 64 individually crafted teapots. Now, interestingly, those teapots were made by an artist in a small village. She has never made so many teapots in her life. She got the whole village involved. So making the pots was a very, very similar process to the ceremony of sharing the actual tea within this culture. You know, one of the maybe most known around the world elements of the local culture is the falcon. And there are moments throughout the collections, they show up in many different places, where we went after the movement of a falcon in air.
I just really enjoy kind of aesthetics within nature and within our surrounding environment. So you kind of have a juxtaposition of the curved frame with the intersecting wires that are kind of very, very straight, which adds a very kind of pleasing aesthetic element to the form, as they look so reminiscent of bird wings.
Okay, here's another beautiful example sculpted in marble of how an artist dealt with a challenge we've given them of speak about a falcon's flight without being obvious, but the artist made that link, and that's a beautiful example of it.
A minha inspiração é geralmente interior. Eu estou sempre a ver para mim como eu sinto, como estou, o que eu encontro, e assim aparecem as formas na minha cabeça e eu começo a criar.
It is a very challenging curatorial work. We wanted to do it as genuine as we could, and for that, we had to adopt some of our curatorial methodologies to be able to bring in everything we could have learned from this culture and then speak it in art and craft and other elements of culture. That was a beautiful gift that we were given, and that's a wonderful thing to say when you finish a project.